Recording start. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Hybrid Friends. Today we want to talk a bit about AVD, and as I'm not a 100% expert on AVD, and there are a lot more information out there to give, I invited Steve and Kushmeen from the Microsoft Product Group, and yeah, want to talk about AVD today and discuss the most burning questions, more or less. So, Kushmeen, Steve, maybe you can introduce you to the community.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Steve Downs. I am the project manager on the Azure Virtual Desktop team responsible for Azure Virtual Desktop for Azure Stack HCI. I've been at Microsoft for, I think, 6 years now. Before that, I worked at other VDI companies in the world. I've been in the VDI space for about 20 years. So I'm excited to be talking to you. Thanks, Flo.
Hey everyone. I'm Kushmeen Cambo. I'm a senior program manager in Azure Edge and Platform team, primarily working on Azure Stack HCI product space with primary responsibility with Azure Virtual Desktop services. So I've been at Microsoft for 2 years, and before that I've been in different IT domains, also in VDI domain. So excited to be here and talking about this new product offering that we launched recently.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And the first question really from customers I work with is, why AVD on HCI? We have AVD on Azure and we have terminal services and Windows service. So why putting AVD on Azure Stack HCI?
So I think it boils down to, AVD is a cloud managed service where traditionally, since it's been released, you could host the service sits in Azure. It's managed by Microsoft, while the virtual desktops are provisioned by the AVD service into the customer subscriptions within Azure, and the customers can manage it there. However, customers have been saying for a long time, there are scenarios that require virtual desktops to stay on premises. So it might be something like data sovereignty, or where there's legal requirements keeping the data on premises or within their sovereign boundaries. Or it might be something like latency. They might sit in a location where the users might sit in a location where they don't have a good connection to the internet or to Azure. So with Azure Stack HCI, we're able to bring the desktops closer to the user.
Yeah. But why in this case? So I think we need to explain Azure Stack HCI a bit for the new people on the channel, but often people don't just ask, why not bring it to Windows Server or to any other platform that VMware? Why explicitly on that Azure Stack HCI platform? Is there something within the platform that is beneficial for, say, Azure PaaS, Azure native services, also like Kubernetes?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for those who don't know, right, Azure Stack HCI is a hyper-converged infrastructure solution that Microsoft offers, and you can use this to host your Windows and Linux VMs or containerized workloads, right? And so that is not just it, right? So with Azure Stack HCI, it's an Arc-enabled service that is offered by Microsoft. So you can manage your on-premises infrastructure, either hosted in an edge or a data center location through Azure. So you can manage your hardware through Azure, and also all the workloads that you're hosting on top of it through Azure. So for example, you can provision and manage your virtual machines as if you're running them in an Azure region, right? So I think it's not just being able to host the environment on premises, but also being able to manage it along with your Azure regions, right? Through a consistent ARM control plane that we offer.
Oh, okay. So let us talk a bit more about the scenarios we're targeting. So I'm a financial institute, for example. I use most of my services in Azure. I use the Azure control plane to manage my service. And as you said, there's data sovereignty, there's maybe data governance, which requires my accountants to work on an environment in my own data centers, because what they're working with personal customer data, they're working with their banking accounts, they're working with phone numbers, pins, whatsoever. Is that a valid scenario for deploying AVD? And if yes, is there another one you're often encountering where customers use AVD?
I would say that's absolutely a scenario we're seeing. We're talking to a lot of financial institutions, and it's because they want the cloud managed service that AVD provides, but they also need the data on premises. So absolutely, they can keep the desktop sit on prem close to the data. The data might be within the desktop, or it might be local on their mainframe, or who knows what these financial institutions are using, but it enables that direct connection from the desktop to the local data.
Yeah. And is there do you see so financial institutes?
Yeah.
Do you see more customers, more scenarios where those technologies can be adopted, or from a Microsoft perspective, where we would like to see that kind of technology?
Yeah, so we see other examples of customers who are, regulated industries are always popular, whether it's financial institutions or governments or healthcare. We have one large healthcare customer that's right now provisioning AVD for Azure Stack HCI. For doctors to use, they'll be moving into emergency rooms soon. Again, it's because they've got the data local, and it's a combination of they need to get to the data quickly, or they need to keep the data local, or they have some sort of HIPAA requirement keeping the data on premises. So the way AVD works is the service sits in Azure, and we keep your metadata, like what users are assigned to desktops. But the things like the patient information can stay local and stay outside of Azure, or move to Azure in a means by which the customer supports. Maybe it's backing up or something like that. But yeah, that's one example. And then we also have a very, very large US government customer that's doing the same thing. And they're actually already deploying Azure Virtual Desktop in Azure with hundreds of thousands of users. And now they've realized, well, we have Azure Virtual Desktop in Azure. It makes sense for us to also, for our on-premises capabilities, use AVD, because the admins can manage the entire control plane from within Azure, whether it's AVD or Azure Stack HCI. It's all in the same control plane. And at the same time, the users have the same experience. They don't have to go to one client for AVD in Azure and another for AVD on Azure Stack HCI. It is the exact same product. The users log in. They might not even know if they're logging into something on premises or in the cloud.
Okay, but
yeah,
you already said there are still components in Azure. So I'm often get the question, now I have AVD on HCI. Is it completely local disconnected scenario, or are there still services, components running out of Azure where I need to have that connectivity to the public cloud, to public Azure?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and share a slide.
So to answer that question, I'm sharing this slide here. So Azure Virtual Desktop Service still resides in Azure, right? It's not available locally in an on-premise environment. It's still in Azure. So Microsoft is managing the service. It takes care of the gateway, your broker, your management, your web access, right? So nothing changes there. User will, in their own subscription, will manage their desktops and applications. The only difference now is that and customer can create their virtual machines to host their session host either in Azure or in Azure Stack HCI, right? And if I go to a different architecture diagram, what you'll see here is that there are two services in play here that are working together to provide AVD on Stack HCI to the customers. So the first service is AVD service, which is, as I said, still in Azure Cloud, right? Which takes care of your brokering, your session management, also your metering, right? And the other service in picture here is your Azure Arc integration, right? Which comes with Azure Stack HCI 23H2 version. So basically it works all your Azure Arc infrastructure, which is required to provision and manage your virtual machines on your HCI cluster, comes with 23H2 version. And what it includes is your Azure Arc resource bridge, all your agentry, right? So these two services together allows you to create your virtual machines from an Azure control plane on your Stack HCI cluster and manage those virtual machines, and B, your AVD service, which allows you to use those virtual machines as a session host and allows users to broker into their desktop and applications using the service. Steve, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't think so. I guess you covered the architecture, but the other thing on this slide is RDP shortpath. That's a key value of Azure Virtual Desktop, where basically traditionally with AVD, when a user logs in, their connection, their RDP connection over TCP is routed up to our AVD gateway that sits in Azure, and then to the session host, and then the session host traffic goes through that gateway again back down to the client. RDP shortpath is a relatively new capability of AVD. You can use it. It's the new default protocol for Azure Virtual Desktop, but it's a UDP-based protocol that, as this diagram shows, is direct from the client to the session host and vice versa. So that hairpinning up to Azure no longer occurs, which we're seeing customers with 0 millisecond latency, or because their desktop is right next to where they're sitting doing their work.
And that answers also the major concern of most customers. Do I now need to send my session data up to Azure and they are coming back? That maybe violates the data governance, data privacy policies. But no, with RDP shortpath and as a default option, it just stays locally in my local network. And only if I change that from a customer perspective, correct me if I'm wrong,
yep,
it would then move back to the Azure session hosts. So it's just, as I said, my basic understanding here is as soon as I have my session, I'm just transferring my data locally without any interaction with the session brokers again until I log off and need to have a new session.
Right. There's kind of two big flows. There's the login. We call that the brokering flow, where you authenticate to Azure. You connect the AVD service. The AVD service presents the desktops and applications to which you have access. The user clicks that, and then the service brokers you to the session. Once that happens, the UDP RDP shortpath connection is established, and that's kind of the session is live. At that point, it is not going through the user session is not going through a broker service. Now, obviously, you are still the virtual desktop is still connecting to the service. The service is still tracking if the desktop host is available and things like that. But the user data itself stays on premises unless you choose to back up that data. And we do see a lot of customers actually doing that. They might, we have a customer that uses geospatial data, and they need to look at that very, very quickly. They might take a picture and want to look at it right away. Well, they don't have time to upload that data to Azure. They want to look at it right then. So they'll work with it locally and then back that data up to Azure so they have it available if they need it later. But that's more of they need to look at the data in real time than a data sovereignty requirement, but it is another use case.
Yeah.
So
guys, with now having AVD and HCI running, what I encounter, especially in often regulated environments, like you said, medical healthcare, where we have Fabric, where all my switches, my HCI, my virtualization environment is in, and it's using a totally different Active Directory than my session hosts, where my users are in. Is that also possible with AVD, so that I have my Fabric domain, and then I have my user domain where the users then log in to the session hosts? Or do HCI need to be in the same Active Directory, in the same domain like my session hosts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You can have your session host VMs on a different Active Directory than your Stack HCI cluster or your Fabric. And that's actually how most customers would manage their infrastructure, right? Keeping their infrastructure separate from all the workloads, especially AVD workloads separately, right? So that's absolutely possible, and there are no technical restrictions or limitations to have your cluster and your workloads in the same Active Directory.
Okay, perfect. So I would leave it with the technical questions for now. So if there's still the comments for the community to use to send questions or send us something on LinkedIn. But one of the most burning questions, and I think that's one thing we need to answer because it goes live on the 1st of April, so most likely when we capture this video now, next week, is the pricing model. So often customers ask, how does the pricing work? What's the impact? So how much do I need to pay for my session hosts? Is there an opportunity for hybrid use benefits? Is there another implication if I'm using M365, for example? So how does that whole construct of pricing work?
Sure. So yeah, pricing is definitely, probably the top question people ask about. And this slide right here covers exactly what that pricing model is. So like you just mentioned, right now, the AVD hybrid meter is not live, but it will go live soon, but I'll get into that. So first of all, on the right-hand side of this slide is what we call user access rights. These are the exact same user access rights required for Azure Virtual Desktop in Azure. It's not a separate user access rights, but if that user has any of the licenses listed here, usually that's M365, E3, E5, or A3, A5, that whole list there, or just Windows 11 or Windows 10 Enterprise or Education or the VDA, they get access to the AVD service. You can also use an RDS cal if you're trying to remote into a Windows server. So again, that's the same exact license for Azure or on HCI, and that doesn't limit you to one desktop, right? You can have that's just that user's access to the service, however many desktops you choose to provision to them. And then the next piece is on the right-hand side, the left-hand side, the Azure Stack HCI. I'll let Kushmeen cover that bit.
Yeah, so on the left is your Azure Stack HCI infrastructure related cost, right? So again, there's nothing new here. If a customer wants to use Azure Stack HCI, right, they'll buy the hardware. So that's the cost associated with that. And then they will pay a monthly Azure Stack HCI service fee on top of it, right, which is $10 per physical core per month. So any customer who wants to use the service, this is the service fee in picture. There's no change there. Also, Azure Hybrid Benefits are eligible. There's no change on that front as well, which means that if you have a Windows Server data center licenses, right, with active software insurance, you're eligible to activate Azure Hybrid Services and basically exchange one core license of your data center license with one physical core of Stack HCI and basically get that fee waived off to an extent, right? So no changes there. It's the same licensing model that we have for Stack HCI. What's new is the middle box, right? Which is AVD on Stack HCI service fee. So it's a consumption-based fee, which will be charged at 1 cent per vCPU per hour of consumption. The service fee has not kicked in yet. It's going to start billing from April 1st of this year. And what this service includes is that ability to use AVD service on Stack HCI. It also includes Windows 10 and Windows 11 Enterprise multi-session VM activation. This happens with the IMDS attestation for Azure verification for VMs, right? So you don't need to buy separate licenses to activate Windows 10 and Windows 11 Enterprise multi-session VMs. So what the service fee is that a good example would be, let's say if you have one VM, which is 8 vCPU, right? So for every hour that VM is up and running, you'll be charged 8 cents, right? And in order to optimize for cost, you'll power down the VM. If it's turned off, if it's powered off, you're not going to get charged for this service fee. The service fee is based on each vCPU consumption, right? So it doesn't matter if one user is logged on to that VM or 10 users are logged on to that VM, right? So it's per vCPU based consumption fee.
So with that and seeing the billing here, I have two questions. In the first, and that's one thing, multi-session host who maybe already knows AVD a bit. Multi-session host is a big thing in AVD on Azure. That means it also comes to Azure Stack HCI to my on-premise environment now, so I can really use that specific or that version of Windows on my AVD environment on-prem. And for those who not know, maybe you explain why that is important to have it.
Definitely. Thanks for that question. So with Azure Virtual Desktop, you do get access to the Windows 11 multi-session. And that is a big feature for customers, because traditionally with virtual desktops, you could either use Windows Server in a multi-session experience, but that would mean you'd have 20 people logging into one VM and sharing all the resources. So if it's an 8 vCPU machine, there's 20 people sharing the CPU there. But you might have to deal with application compatibility issues. Some apps don't work on Windows Server. Some capabilities that are on the Windows Client OS are not in Windows Server. You might be able to skin the server to look like a Windows desktop, but at the end of the day, it's not, and some things are just missing. So you have to make a compromise if you're using Windows Server in a multi-session experience because of that, and your users will feel it. It's not like their laptop that's sitting on their desk. You also, in that scenario, need an RDS CAL. So you have to purchase an RDS CAL, or it might be a SAL, for each user or device to log in to that Windows Server experience. On the other side, you have the Windows Client single session OS, whether it's Windows 11 or Windows 10. And in that scenario, it is the full, like local, physical desktop experience, but every single user needs their own virtual machine. So that means if a user is using that OS, they each get their own resources. So if every user has a VM with 4 vCPUs, that means you need that many more resources versus those users sharing a larger server OS. So your data center footprint gets larger, your expenses get larger, the things you have to manage grow, etc. So with AVD, we combined both of the best of that scenario. You get the multi-session experience of multiple users sharing resources, so your costs go down, and then the user experience is optimized because it is our client OS. So you get access to the applications that you get on the client experience, and the users get the same thing they're used to with their laptops. And you don't need RDS CALs anymore, because in this user access rights column, you can see here what entitles you to the AVD service is the exact same entitlements that entitle you to the Windows Client OS.
Yeah, and I'll add that HCI also offers has integration with Azure Marketplace, so you're able to directly download these multi-session images using this Marketplace integration on your cluster. So it's quite easy, right, to bring down these multi-session images on your cluster now.
That sounds amazing, but now think of one thing. I now use all these amazing features, and I have a per hour vCPU fee, and normally I'm running with 7,000 users during the workday, and then during the night hours I only have 7 people connected. Those those crazy developers, or like us, who need to in EMEA, who need to work with some colleagues in the US. What I'm currently missing, and if I'm allowed to do a feature request here, what I'm still missing in HCI right now is is there any kind of auto scaling coming like we have in AVD, or do I need to script it myself?
Yeah, sure. So absolutely, auto scaling and Start VM on Connect are two topmost feature requests that we have received from our customers since the day we have announced the launch, right? So these features are definitely in progress, in development, and are going to become available very soon to our customers for being and be able to manage these costs, right? In the scenario that you just explained, that most of the users are logging in for the first 8 hours of the day, and then you need to spin down your VMs to save on cost. So absolutely, the features, both the features are gonna get released very soon, and in a preview capacity, and I think all our customers are going to become very happy once we announce that.
Yeah, and I'll add, it's important to note there that this autoscale capability is the exact same capability that's available in Azure. You create your auto scale, you configure your auto scaling in the exact same way, and that theme plays out throughout the product. The top question I'm hearing a lot of people ask, and they ask it to my peers on the AVD team. My peers on my team will be building a feature, and somebody will say, "Is it available on Azure Stack HCI?" And at the end of the day, for the most part, the answer is yes, because it's not a separate service. Autoscale here is the exact same thing. It's a feature of AVD, so it's coming to Azure Stack HCI. We had to do a little bit of integration work just because the commands here to turn on a VM on Azure Stack HCI require some different engineering work. But at the end of the day, our goal is feature parity across the service. And once we have autoscale and start VM on Connect, we will be very, very close to there. There will be a couple other features also coming in the next few months, but we're close.
Yeah. So basically, as to summarize that and also close our interview for today, is you're more or less treating session hosts on HCI like they would run in Azure in our own environment, so that you want to have a feature parity between both. Maybe not directly when we release a feature on AVD and Azure, but at the end, very close and very soon to, or let's have a very close relationship or close feature list from AVD running on HCI versus running on Azure. Is that correct for?
Absolutely. I mean, our goal is, the same day a feature releases in Azure, it will be available on Stack HCI, and I think you'll see us meet that goal. It's just because we wanted to release this as quickly as we could. We shipped without autoscale, just knowing that the meter would be going live April 1st, and now we have the autoscale capability coming live around the same time. But yeah, absolutely, you should expect the user experience in particular parity there day one feature launches.
Perfect. Then thank you so much for the talk today. If there are more questions from the community, I would just forward them to you when I see those in the comments. For everyone else, thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you both. And if you want to see more on AVD on HCI or AVD on Azure, just use the comments, and I will try to get Kushmeen and Steve back on screen here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. Yeah,
this has been a good time. I really appreciate you having us, and I look forward to the questions and comments from your viewers.
Perfect. Then thank you and goodbye.